do another example with another tip. So here, this tip is that we can group polyatomic ions as long as they don't change what they are on either side. So let's take a look at an example of that. So here we have aluminum bromide reacts with potassium sulfate to form potassium bromide and aluminum sulfate. So the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what our chemical equation is. So we have aluminum bromide. If you think back to the periodic table, or maybe you've memorized at this point, aluminum has a charge of +3, while bromine has a charge of -1. So we need 3 BRs for every AL. So it is AlBr3. And then potassium sulfate. Sulfate is one of your polyatomic ions, SO4 2-. Potassium is K+. So we need 2 potassiums for every 1 sulfate. So potassium sulfate is K2SO4. To form potassium bromide, they're both plus or minus 1, so that's just KBr. Plus aluminum sulfate. Aluminum has a charge of +3, sulfate -2, so we can switch the coefficients. So we'll have 2 aluminums, and then 3 sulfates, right? That's the balanced compound for aluminum sulfate. And now we want to go ahead and count them up and try to balance them. So we want to take a look at aluminum, potassium, bromine, and then I can group the sulfate just together as just SO4 2-, because I noticed I only have sulfate here and sulfate here, so I can group them together. If I had sulfurs and oxygens elsewhere, I could count those separately. In this case, I don't. So on the product side, or on the reactant side, I have 1 aluminum from the AlBr3. On the right side, I have 2 aluminums from the aluminum sulfate. On the left side, I have 2 potassiums. On the right side, I only have 1. On the left side, I have 3 bromines. On the right side, I only have 1. On the left side, I have 1 sulfate. On the right side, I have 3. So in this case, it doesn't matter where you start with. There's nothing that shows up in more than one compound on one side of the chemical equation. So you can start anywhere that you want. I'm just going to go ahead and start with aluminum because it's the first thing that pops up. And I need to put a 2 right there. That way to ensure that I have the same amount of aluminums on each side. So now I have 2 aluminums, but now that also launches me up to 6 bromines. Next up, I'm going to just arbitrarily pick the potassiums to try to balance them out a little bit. So I have, I need 2 potassiums, so I can put a 2 right here. So that'll double that to 2, and then the bromine to 2 as well. You can tell that's not going to be enough. Let's switch back and let's do the sulfates now. Again, it doesn't really matter which order you do this. Eventually, you're going to get to the right answer. It's just from some practice. So we need 3 sulfates. So that'll launch that up to 3 for our sulfates on the reactant side. But then that'll kick us all the way up to 6 potassiums. All right, my aluminums and my sulfates are balanced out nicely. Just the potassium and bromine are not. And then with each case, we have 6 on the reactant side and only 2 on the product side. So I can go ahead and just change this 2 into a 6. And then I'll have 6 on either side. And my chemical equation should be balanced. Of course, now I should rewrite and double check this. So let's see, I have 2 AlBr3 plus 3 K2SO4 going to 6 KBr plus an Al2SO4 And then I'll see what I have on the left side and on the right side. For aluminum, I have 2 of them. For bromine, I have 6, right? 2 times 3 is 6. For potassium, I have 6 as well. 3 times 2 is 6. And then for sulfate, I've got 2 of them. On the right side, I've got, start off with aluminum, so we're starting the same thing. We have an Al2, so that's 2 aluminum, so that checks out right there. For the bromine, we've got 6 of them from the 6 KBRs, so that checks out right there. For the potassium, we've got 6, again, from that KBR. So that checks out right there. And then the sulfate, I have 3 of them, which doesn't quite check out right here, but if you'll notice, I made an error on the left side. Right, this 2 should actually be a 3 from right there. So that's why it's always good to double check. You can find any errors in your work or your understanding. Overall, again, it's really just about getting some practice in.